The ship was falling apart around me before it even hit the ground. Metal screamed against metal. Sparks rained across my visor. The console in front of me flashed one single word over and over. Warning, 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 as if I did not already know that. I gripped the controls with both hands and tried to keep the nose up, but the jungle below was rushing toward me faster than any training had prepared me for. Then the world turned into fire and noise. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on my back, staring up through a hole in the hull at a sky the color of rust. My ears were ringing. My chest hurt with every breath. For a moment I could not remember my own name, and then it came back to me slowly, the way a name returns after a long sleep. Daniel Cole, scout pilot. Registration number burned into my mind through years of drills. I forced myself to sit up. The cockpit was a wreck of broken glass and twisted metal, and beyond it, through the shattered viewport, I could see trees taller than any building I had ever stood beneath, their bark glowing faintly blue in the dim light. This was not a world I recognized from any chart I had studied. My ship had drifted off course during the ambush, and now I was alone, grounded, and completely lost. I checked my suit for damage, a few cracks along the left arm, nothing that would kill me immediately, but enough that I did not have long before the air outside would find its way in. I needed shelter. I needed to signal for help. I needed to move. That was when I heard it. A small sound. A cry. At first I told myself it was the wind moving through the broken hull, or some animal far off in the trees. But it came again, closer this time, and there was something about it that no wind could ever make. It was the sound of something afraid, something alone. I should have ignored it. Every rule I had ever been taught told me to secure my own position first, to find cover, to think only of survival. But my legs were already moving before my mind had finished deciding, climbing over broken metal, following that small broken sound through the wreckage toward the back of the ship where the hull had split wide open. There, curled into the shadow of a fallen support beam, was a child. Not a human child. Her skin had a faint shine to it, like polished stone under moonlight, and her eyes were too large for her face, dark and wet with fear. Thin ridges ran along her arms, faintly glowing the same soft blue as the trees outside. She could not have been older than 5 or 6, if her people aged anything like mine did. She flinched away from me the moment she saw my shadow fall across her, pressing herself further into the corner, clutching something small and broken against her chest. I froze. I had never seen anything like her before. I had certainly never expected to find a child, of any species, inside the wreckage of my own crashed ship. She must have been thrown clear from somewhere else, carried by the same storm of debris that had brought me down, or perhaps she had been here all along, hidden somewhere I had not yet explored. I lowered myself slowly, kneeling so that I was smaller, less of a threat. My translator implant was still active, faint static crackling in my ear as it struggled to process whatever language, if any, existed here. I spoke anyway, softly, the way I might speak to any frightened child. "I am not going to hurt you." The words meant nothing to her, I was certain of that. My translator had nothing to work with, no matching patterns, no matching sounds. But something in my tone must have reached her, because the tension in her small shoulders eased, just slightly. She watched me with those enormous eyes, unmoving, unsure. I noticed the object she held against her chest. It looked like a piece of shaped crystal, broken clean down the middle, its edges catching the dim light in strange colors. Whatever it was, it clearly mattered to her. She held it the way a person holds the only thing they have left. Outside, somewhere in the distance, I heard a new sound, deep, rhythmic, like something enormous moving through the trees, searching. The child heard it too. Her whole body went rigid, and she pressed herself even further into the shadows, her breathing fast and shallow. Whatever was out there, she was terrified of it, or terrified for herself because of it. I did not know which. I only knew that I had 2 choices in that moment. I could leave her here, retreat to what remained of my ship, seal myself in, and wait for a rescue signal that might never come. Or I could do something that went against every piece of training I had ever received. I held out my hand, not to grab her, just to offer it. Palm open, fingers relaxed, the same gesture I would use with a frightened animal, or a frightened person, or anyone who needed to know that I meant no harm. She stared at my hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she reached out one small, trembling hand and placed it in mine. Her skin was warm, warmer than I expected, and in that instant, feeling the weight of her tiny hand in mine, something in me settled into a decision I had not consciously made, but which felt, somehow, like the only right one. I was not leaving her here. The sound outside grew louder, closer, and I realized we did not have much time. I gathered her up carefully, feeling how light she was, how her small arms wrapped around my neck and held on with surprising strength for someone so small. She kept the broken crystal pressed tightly between us, refusing to let it go even for a moment. I moved toward the far end of the wreckage, away from the direction the sound was coming from, searching for another way out. My suit display flickered with warnings about the air outside, about radiation levels, about a dozen things that should have made me stop and think twice. I ignored all of it. We found a gap in the hull large enough to climb through, and I eased us both out into the open air of this world for the first time. The trees towered above us, their strange blue light casting long shadows across a forest floor covered in something that looked like silver moss. It was beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with safety. It was also, I understood immediately, incredibly dangerous. The child in my arms grew tense again, and this time she pointed, one small finger extending toward a gap between two massive trees. I followed her gesture and saw movement in the shadows there, tall shapes moving with purpose, armored, searching. Soldiers. Her people's soldiers, I guessed, though I had no way to be certain. And from the way she reacted, pressing herself against me, trying to make herself smaller, I understood that whatever was happening here, she did not want them to find her. Or perhaps she did not want them to find her like this, in the arms of a stranger who looked nothing like her own kind. I ducked behind the nearest tree, my heart hammering, and waited. The soldiers passed close, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground beneath us, their voices low and urgent, in a language my translator still could not decode. I held my breath. The child in my arms did the same, her small body trembling against mine, her grip on the broken crystal tightening until her knuckles paled. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of their footsteps faded into the distance. I let out the breath I had been holding and looked down at the child. She looked back up at me, and for the first time something in her expression shifted. Not trust, not exactly, but something close to it, something that had not been there a few minutes before. I did not know who she was. I did not know why an entire patrol of armed soldiers was searching this forest, or what that broken crystal meant to her, or why she had been alone in the wreckage of my ship in the first place. All I knew was that I was now stranded on an alien world, carrying an alien child through hostile territory, with soldiers who might mean us harm somewhere nearby, and a rescue that might never come. And somehow, despite all of that, I found myself thinking of only one thing as I held her a little tighter and started moving deeper into the trees, away from the wreckage, away from the soldiers, toward whatever came next. I was not going to let anything happen to her. Whatever this world wanted from me, whatever answers waited in the shadows ahead, I would find them. But first, I needed to keep this child safe, and something told me, deep in my chest, that this was only the very beginning of a story, far larger than either of us yet understood. We walked for hours before I let myself stop. The forest never seemed to end, tree after glowing tree stretching endlessly in every direction, and every few minutes I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, certain I heard footsteps behind us that were not there. The child had fallen quiet against my shoulder, her small hand still wrapped tightly around the broken crystal, her eyes half closed with exhaustion. I found a hollow beneath the roots of an enormous tree, wide enough to hide us both, and finally allowed myself to rest. My suit display flickered weakly in the darkness, oxygen levels dropping, structural damage to the left arm seal increasing, a dozen numbers telling me in their own quiet way that I did not have much time left before this world killed me on its own, without any help from soldiers or beasts. I needed answers, and I needed them quickly. I pulled up the last data my ship had recorded before the crash, hoping something in the wreckage of my instruments might explain where I had ended up, and why. The files were damaged, fragments only, but one piece caught my attention immediately. A transmission, captured moments before impact, in a language my translator had partially decoded during the chaos of the crash. It was not a full sentence, just pieces, fragments of words that computer had stitched together as best it could. Daughter, taken, grief, silence. I stared at those 4 words for a long time, feeling a cold weight settle in my stomach. I looked down at the child sleeping against me, at the way her small fingers refused to loosen their grip on the broken crystal even in sleep, and a terrible thought began to take shape in my mind. What if she was not simply lost? What if she had been taken from somewhere, and something had gone wrong, and somehow, through no fault or plan of my own, she had ended up here, with me, in the wreckage of a ship that had crashed on the exact world she called home? I did not want to believe it, but the pieces were beginning to fit together in a way that made my chest tighten with something close to dread. I spent the rest of that night piecing together everything my damaged systems could recover. Old orbital scans taken automatically as we entered the system, before the ambush that sent us spiraling down. Signal intercepts my ship had picked up without my knowledge, translated slowly and imperfectly by an overworked system running on failing power. What I found painted a picture I had not expected. This world was not simply inhabited, it was ruled, in a way that had nothing to do with governments or councils as I understood them. There was a single presence at the center of everything here, something the intercepted signals referred to again and again with the same word, translated imperfectly into something close to queen. Not a queen in the way my own people use the word, a ruler chosen or born into a line of succession. This was something deeper, something biological, something that connected every living creature in this forest and beyond it into a single vast breathing whole. The queen was not simply in charge of her people. She was, in some way I did not fully understand, connected to all of them, mind and body both, in a bond that stretched across her entire world. And several weeks ago, according to the fragments I managed to piece together, something had happened to break that bond in the worst possible way. Her daughter had disappeared. The signals grew chaotic after that point, patrols multiplying, search parties expanding outward in every direction, urgent messages passed back and forth between soldiers and commanders, all of them carrying the same desperate tone underneath their words. They were searching for someone precious, someone whose loss had sent ripples of panic through their entire world. And somewhere in the confusion of that search, according to the timeline I was slowly assembling, an unrelated skirmish had broken out near the edge of their territory. A skirmish involving human ships. My ships. Scouts from my own fleet, patrolling borders we did not fully understand, clashing with local forces who mistook us for something we were not. I felt sick. It was possible, though I could not be certain, that the chaos of that skirmish, the very same skirmish that had sent my own ship spinning off course and crashing into this jungle, was connected somehow to how this child had ended up separated from her people in the first place. Perhaps she had been caught in the crossfire. Perhaps she had been hiding from the fighting and become lost. I would likely never know the full truth of it, but the possibility alone was enough to make my hands tremble as I looked down at her sleeping face. If my own people, even unknowingly, even without meaning to, had played any part in tearing this child away from her mother, then I was not simply a stranger who happened to find her. I was, in some small way, connected to the very disaster that had caused all of this. That realization changed something in me. This was no longer simply about surviving long enough to be rescued. This was no longer simply about the decency of not leaving a frightened child alone in a dangerous forest. This had become something closer to a debt I owed, whether anyone else would ever know it or not. I thought of the fragments describing the queen herself, and what her people were now saying about her condition. The word shattered appeared again and again in the intercepted communications, always spoken with a kind of reverent fear, as though it described something far worse than simple grief. From what I could piece together, the bond connecting the queen to her people was not something that could simply switch off when tragedy struck. When her daughter vanished, that connection did not sever cleanly. It tore, violently, and the tearing had left the queen in a state her own people did not fully know how to heal. Reports spoke of entire settlements falling into disorder, of soldiers turning against their own commanders, of a rot spreading slowly through the structure of her civilization, because the very thing holding it together had broken. Without her guidance, without whatever unseen strength she provided to her people, everything was beginning to fall apart. I looked down again at the small, sleeping form curled against me, and I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, exactly how much rested on this one small life. Somewhere out there, not far from where we now hid, an entire civilization's fate was tied to the survival of this single child, and to the choice I now had to make about what to do with her. I could try to signal my own fleet, wait for rescue, and hand her over to whatever protocols existed for handling first contact with an unknown species. That was the safe choice, the expected choice, the one that followed every rule I had ever been trained to follow. Or I could try to bring her home myself. The second option terrified me. It meant walking directly into the heart of a civilization that had every reason to see me as an enemy, carrying their most precious survivor with me, hoping that somehow, against every likelihood, I would be given the chance to explain rather than simply be destroyed on sight. It meant trusting that whatever remained of the queen's mind, however shattered it might be, would recognize her own daughter before her soldiers decided I was simply another threat to be eliminated. It was reckless. It was almost certainly foolish. But every time I looked down at the child sleeping against my chest, at the way her small hand refused to release that broken crystal even in her dreams, I felt that same decision settling deeper into my chest, the one I had made back in the wreckage of my ship without truly understanding why. I was not simply going to protect her until someone else came to take responsibility. I was going to return her home myself, to the one person in this entire world who needed her back more than anyone else ever could. The child stirred slightly in her sleep, murmuring something too soft and broken for my translator to catch, and her hand tightened briefly around the crystal she carried before relaxing again. I watched her for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made settle over me like a second skin. Morning light, or whatever passed for it beneath this world's thick canopy, began filtering down through the trees, casting pale shafts of blue-tinted glow across the forest floor. Somewhere in the distance, faint and far away, I heard the same deep, searching sound from the night before, still moving through the trees, still hunting. I gathered the child gently into my arms, careful not to wake her fully, and rose to my feet. My suit warned me again of failing systems, of dwindling time, of 100 reasons why what I was about to attempt was almost certainly going to fail. I ignored every one of those warnings. Somewhere out there, deep within this world I barely understood, a queen sat broken and shattered, her mind torn apart by grief, her civilization crumbling around her because the one thing holding it together had been ripped away, and I was the only person who might be able to give that missing piece back to her. I took a slow breath, steadied myself, and began walking in the direction the soldiers had come from the night before, toward whatever waited for us at the heart of this broken world. The forest grew stranger the deeper we went. Trees that had seemed impossibly tall near the crash site gave way to structures I first mistook for more trees, until I realized they were too symmetrical, too deliberate, grown rather than built, twisting upward into shapes that reminded me of towers. Threads of pale light ran along their surfaces like veins, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. I understood, without needing anyone to tell me, that we had crossed from wild forest into something closer to civilization. The child had woken not long after we started moving, and she watched everything around us with wide, careful eyes. She did not speak, not in any way my translator could catch, but she pointed occasionally, guiding me with small gestures around obstacles I would not have noticed on my own. A patch of ground that looked solid but was not. A gap between structures that offered better cover than the open path beside it. She was young, but she knew this world far better than I ever could, and slowly, I began to trust her instincts as much as my own. The first real danger came on the second day. We were crossing a shallow ravine, moving as quietly as I could manage while carrying her, when the ground ahead of us shifted, and 3 armored figures rose up from where they had been waiting, weapons already leveled toward us. My whole body went cold. I had no weapon of my own, nothing but my hands, and whatever words I could offer, and none of those words would mean anything to soldiers, trained to see intruders as threats to be removed. I stopped where I was, raising my free hand slowly, palm open, the same gesture that had worked with the child back in the wreckage. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The soldiers did not lower their weapons, but they did not fire either. Their attention had shifted, all 3 of them staring past me, toward the small figure held against my chest. I felt the child stir, and then, to my surprise, she lifted her head and made a sound, a series of clicks and soft tones that my translator still could not fully decode, but which clearly meant something to the soldiers in front of us. Their posture changed instantly. Weapons lowered, just slightly. One of them took a step closer, then stopped, uncertain, clearly caught between the impossible sight of a stranger like me and the unmistakable presence of a child they seemed to recognize. The child spoke again, more urgently this time, and pointed toward me, then toward herself, then made a sweeping gesture that I could only interpret as some kind of explanation. I do not know what she told them. I will likely never know exactly what words she used, but whatever it was, it bought us something precious. Not trust, not yet, but hesitation, and hesitation, in that moment, was enough to keep us both alive. The soldiers did not attack. Instead, they retreated a short distance, speaking rapidly among themselves, glancing back at us again and again as though unsure what to do with information that did not fit anything they had been trained to expect. I used that confusion to slip away, moving quickly along the ravine and out of sight before they could reach a decision that might not favor us. We did not stop moving again until the light beneath the canopy had shifted from pale morning blue to the deeper shade of afternoon. That encounter taught me something important. The child was known. Whatever she was to her people, whoever her mother truly was, the mere sight of her was enough to give even armed soldiers pause. That recognition might be the only thing capable of getting me through the rest of this journey alive. But recognition alone would not be enough forever. Eventually we would reach somewhere far more heavily guarded, somewhere soldiers would not simply hesitate at the sight of her, somewhere I would need more than luck and confusion to survive. I used the quiet hours of walking to try communicating with her directly, slowly, patiently, the way I imagined anyone might try to reach a child who had lost everything familiar to her. I pointed to myself and said my name, over and over, until eventually she repeated it back, her small mouth working carefully around the unfamiliar sound. Daniel. It was not perfect. The sound came out softened, rounded at the edges by whatever shape her mouth was built for. But it was unmistakably my name, and hearing her say it for the first time did something to me I had not expected. It made this all feel less like a mission and more like something else entirely, something closer to responsibility, closer to care. In return, she pointed to herself, and after a moment of clear effort, offered a sound of her own. It took several attempts before my translator managed to catch enough of the pattern to offer an approximation, but eventually a name settled into place between us. Suri. I said it back to her, and something in her expression shifted, soft and small, the first thing close to a smile I had seen from her since finding her in the wreckage. It was a small victory, but out here, in the middle of an alien world that wanted us both dead in a dozen different ways, small victories mattered more than I had ever appreciated before. The days blurred together after that. We moved mostly by night, resting in whatever shelter we could find during the brighter hours, when patrols seemed more active. Suri grew more comfortable with me as time passed, no longer flinching at my touch, sometimes even reaching for my hand herself when the terrain grew difficult. She still carried her broken crystal everywhere, refusing to set it down even to eat the strange, nutrient-dense fruit we occasionally found growing along our path, fruit that Suri seemed to know instinctively was safe. We had settled into what I believed was a safe hollow between two massive root systems when the ground around us began to tremble, faint at first, then stronger, accompanied by the same deep searching sound I had heard on the very first night. This time it was close, too close. I scooped Suri up immediately and pressed us both back into the deepest shadow the hollow offered, holding my breath, willing my suit's systems to stay silent, praying that whatever tracked us through this forest relied on sight or sound rather than anything more advanced. Massive shapes moved past our hiding place, larger than the soldiers we had encountered before, covered in dark plating that seemed to drink in what little light reached this part of the forest. They moved with purpose, systematically, sweeping the area in a pattern that told me clearly this was no random patrol. They were searching specifically for something, or someone. Suri trembled against me, her grip tightening on my arm, and I held her closer, whispering the only words of comfort I had, even though I knew she could not understand them. "It is going to be all right, I promise." The shapes eventually moved on, their heavy footsteps fading into the distance, and I allowed myself to breathe again only once the forest had fallen silent around us. That encounter left me shaken in a way the earlier one had not. Whatever those larger figures were, they represented a level of danger I did not think we could talk or hesitate our way past a second time. We were running out of forest and running out of time. Whatever waited for us at the heart of this world, wherever the Queen herself now sat in her broken, shattered state, we needed to reach it soon, before either exhaustion, hunger, or something far worse in the dark caught up with us first. I looked down at Suri, her small face illuminated faintly by the residual glow of the trees around us, and made a silent promise that I intended to keep no matter what stood between us and the end of this journey. We continued on before the first light of the next day had fully broken through the canopy above. By midday, the forest opened up ahead of us, and for the first time since the crash, I saw the true scale of the world I had found myself trapped within. The trees gave way to a vast clearing, and rising from its center was a structure unlike anything I had ever seen, a living cathedral grown from the same pale, glowing material as the smaller towers we had passed earlier, but taller than any building I had known, its surface pulsing slowly with veins of soft light that beat in a rhythm almost like breathing. Around its base, hundreds of smaller structures spread outward in careful, deliberate patterns, forming what could only be described as a city, though nothing about its design resembled anything human hands had ever built. Suri went very still in my arms. I felt her breathing change, quick and shallow, and when I looked down at her face, I saw something there I had not expected. Not fear exactly, something closer to longing, mixed with a grief so raw it made my chest ache just to witness it. She was looking at her home for the first time in what must have felt like an eternity to a child her age, and every part of her wanted to run toward it, while some other part of her seemed to hold back, uncertain of what waited within. I understood, in that moment, that we had finally arrived, and that everything from here forward would depend on choices I could not fully control. I set her down gently, kneeling so we were at eye level, and pointed toward the towering structure ahead of us, then toward her, then made a questioning gesture with my open hands. She understood immediately, nodding, small tears gathering at the corners of her wide eyes as she pointed toward the structure and then placed her small hand flat against her own chest. Home. I nodded and stood, taking her hand in mine. There was no path forward that involved sneaking the rest of the way. The clearing ahead offered no cover, no shadows to hide within, nothing but open ground between us and whatever waited at the heart of that pulsing cathedral. If we were going to reach the Queen, We would have to walk directly into the open, in full view of anyone watching, and trust that Suri's presence would be enough to keep us both alive, long enough to be heard. I took a slow breath, steadied my nerves as best I could, and stepped out of the tree line with Suri's small hand held firmly in mine. The reaction was immediate. Figures emerged from every direction, soldiers in dark armor, dozens of them, weapons raised, forming a rapidly closing circle around us before we had taken more than a few steps into the open. I forced myself to stop moving, raising my free hand slowly, palm open, while keeping Suri close against my side with the other. "I am not here to hurt anyone," I said, my voice steady despite the fear pounding through every part of me. "I am only here to bring her home." My translator did its best to render the words into something close to their language, though I doubted it managed anything more than fragments. It did not matter. The soldiers were not looking at me. Every eye among them had fixed on Suri, and I watched disbelief ripple through their ranks as recognition slowly dawned on face after face. One of them, older than the rest, marked with patterns of light along her armor that the others lacked, stepped forward slowly, lowering her weapon entirely. She said something I could not understand, her voice trembling with an emotion I recognized instantly despite the alien sounds carrying it. Suri let go of my hand and ran to her. The soldier caught her, dropping to her knees, wrapping the small child in an embrace so tight and desperate that I felt my own throat tighten watching it. Around us, the circle of soldiers had gone completely still, weapons lowered now, every one of them staring at the reunion in front of them, as though witnessing something they had stopped believing was possible. The older soldier finally looked up at me, tears streaking down a face built from lines and features so different from my own, yet somehow expressing exactly the same thing any grieving parent's face might show upon receiving an impossible gift. She spoke rapidly, urgently, and though I understood almost none of it, the tone carried a clear enough message. She wanted to know how. She wanted to know why a stranger like me had done this. "I do not have all the answers," I told her honestly, my translator working to convey what fragments it could. "I found her. I could not leave her behind." Whatever meaning survived the translation seemed to be enough. The soldier rose, lifting Suri into her arms, and gestured for me to follow, her weapon holstered now, her posture no longer hostile but urgent, almost pleading. Around us the other soldiers fell into formation, not surrounding me as prisoners might be surrounded, but escorting me, the way one might escort someone of importance. We moved quickly toward the great structure at the city's center, and as we drew closer, I began to understand more clearly what this place truly was. It was not simply a building. It pulsed with life in a way no human architecture ever had, its walls shifting slightly with each breath-like rhythm, threads of light running through it like blood through veins. This entire structure was connected to something living, something whose condition affected every part of the world around it. We passed through an opening large enough to admit a dozen soldiers walking abreast, into a vast chamber lit by the same soft, pulsing glow, and there, at the chamber's very center, I saw her for the first time. The Queen. She was massive, far larger than anything I had encountered among her people so far, her form a strange and beautiful combination of the crystalline shimmer I had seen in Suri and something closer to the living architecture surrounding us. She lay curled upon a raised platform, unmoving, her eyes open but distant, fixed on nothing at all. Around her, dozens of attendants moved quietly, tending to her in ways I did not fully understand, their movements careful, almost reverent, edged with a grief so palpable it filled the entire chamber like a fog. This was what shattered meant. Not simply broken in body, but broken in whatever connected her to the world around her. She lay there like something hollowed out, present but absent, alive but not truly living. The soldier carrying Suri approached slowly, and I felt every eye in the chamber turn toward us as she drew closer to the platform. She knelt, lifting Suri up so that the child was visible to the Queen lying above them both, and spoke words I could not understand, though their meaning needed no translation at all. For a long moment, nothing happened. The Queen's distant eyes did not shift, did not focus, remained fixed on whatever empty point they had been staring at for weeks. Then Suri, small and fragile and utterly determined, reached out with both hands, holding the broken crystal she had carried through the entire forest, and called out a single sound, sharp and clear, that echoed through the vast chamber like a struck bell. The Queen's eyes moved. Slowly, as though waking from the deepest sleep imaginable, her enormous gaze shifted, focused, found the small figure being held up toward her. I watched something ripple through her entire body, a shudder that seemed to travel outward from her chest through every limb, and then, all at once, recognition bloomed across features I had thought incapable of expression only moments before. The sound she made then was unlike anything I had heard before or since. Not quite a cry, not quite a roar, something that seemed to carry through the very walls of the chamber itself, and I felt the ground beneath my feet tremble in response, as though the entire structure recognized the sound and answered it in kind. The Queen surged upward, faster than something her size should have been capable of moving, and gathered Suri into an embrace that seemed to swallow the small child entirely within the folds of her massive form. The chamber around us erupted, attendants crying out, soldiers dropping to their knees, the pulsing light along the walls suddenly brightening, beating faster, as though the entire building had just remembered how to breathe properly again. I stood frozen at the edge of that overwhelming reunion, watching as weeks of grief and stillness broke apart in an instant, replaced by something so raw and powerful that I felt tears gathering in my own eyes without fully understanding why. The Queen lifted her head eventually, her massive form still curled protectively around Suri, and her gaze found me across the chamber. For a long, terrifying moment, I did not know what would happen next. I had walked into the heart of an alien civilization, unarmed, carrying their most precious survivor, and now stood exposed before a being whose grief had nearly torn her entire world apart. Her eyes studied me carefully, and I forced myself to stand still, to meet that gaze without flinching, even as every instinct screamed at me to look away. Then, slowly, the Queen inclined her massive head toward me, a gesture that needed no translation at all. It was the closest thing to a bow I had ever seen an alien queen offer a human, and in that single motion, I understood that whatever came next between her people and mine, this moment would matter more than any treaty or negotiation ever could. The days that followed passed in a blur unlike anything I had experienced before. I was given quarters within the living structure itself, a small chamber near the outer walls, its surface warm to the touch, pulsing gently with the same soft light that ran through every part of this place. Attendants brought food I did not recognize, but that Suri, appearing at my door often enough that I began to expect her, assured me through careful gestures was safe. She had appointed herself, it seemed, as my guide through this strange new existence, and I found myself grateful for her small, steady presence more times than I could count. The Queen did not speak with me directly at first. I understood, from what little the soldiers managed to convey through patient gestures and my slowly improving translator, that recovering from a shattering was not instantaneous, even once the cause of it had been resolved. The bond that connected her to her people needed time to knit itself back together properly, and though her mind had returned, fragments of the damage lingered, threading slowly back into place like a wound healing beneath the skin. I used that time to learn what I could about the world I had found myself trapped within. Suri, through patience and repetition, taught me pieces of her language, and I taught her pieces of mine in return. Within days, we had built a small shared vocabulary between us, enough that actual conversation, however simple, became possible. She told me, in fragments strung together across many attempts, about the day she had gone missing, about confusion during a distant skirmish, about hiding when the fighting grew too close, about becoming lost in unfamiliar terrain until she found herself, days later, near the wreckage of a ship that had fallen from the sky. My ship. I confirmed, gently, that the skirmish she described matched the timeline of my own crash, and something settled between us in that admission, a quiet acknowledgement that our two stories, however impossible it seemed, had always been connected long before I found her in that wreckage. She did not blame me. If anything, she seemed to view the connection as something closer to fate, the kind of coincidence her people apparently placed great meaning upon. I was not so certain fate had anything to do with it, but I did not argue the point. Whatever force had brought us together, the outcome mattered more than the cause. On the 7th day since our arrival at the city, I was finally summoned before the Queen directly. I entered the great chamber with more confidence than I had managed the first time, though my heart still pounded as I approached the platform where she rested. She looked different now than she had during that first desperate reunion, more alert, more present, her massive form no longer curled in the stillness of grief, but sitting upright, watching my approach with eyes that had regained a clarity I had not seen before. Suri sat beside her, and it was through Suri, translating slowly and carefully between us, that the Queen finally addressed me directly. "She wishes to know why," Suri said, her small voice careful with the weight of the question she carried. "Why a stranger from the stars would risk everything to bring a child of another species home, when doing so offered you nothing in return." I considered the question carefully before answering, aware that whatever I said now would shape everything that followed. I told her the truth, translated through Suri's patient efforts, piece by piece. I told her that I had heard a child crying in the wreckage of my own crashed ship, and that some part of me, some instinct that had nothing to do with training or protocol, refused to leave her there alone. I told her that once I understood who Suri truly was, and what her loss had done to an entire world, I understood that returning her was no longer simply an act of kindness, but something closer to responsibility, given how my own people's presence in this system had likely contributed to the chaos that separated her from her mother in the first place. I told her I expected nothing in return. I had done what I believed was right, and whatever came next, whether gratitude or continued suspicion, was a decision that belonged entirely to her and her people. The Queen listened to every word, her large eyes never leaving mine, and when Suri finished translating, a long silence stretched through the chamber. Then the Queen spoke again, and this time her tone carried something I had not expected, something almost gentle. She says, Suri translated slowly, that her people were taught for generations to fear beings like you, that the stars beyond this world had always brought conflict, never kindness, that she herself believed this, until the moment she opened her eyes and found her daughter returned to her, carried through danger by the very kind of creature she had been taught to see as an enemy. I did not know how to respond to that, so I remained quiet, letting the weight of her words settle. She says that debts between her people are not spoken lightly, Suri continued, and that the debt she owes you now is one she intends to honor, not simply with words, but with actions that will outlast either of us. The Queen rose then, slowly, her massive form unfolding to its full height, and for the first time since our arrival, I saw something in her posture that reminded me less of a grieving mother and more of the powerful ruler she must have been before tragedy struck her people. She extended one long limb toward me, palm open in a gesture that mirrored the very one I had offered Suri back in the wreckage of my ship, all those days ago. I understood, without needing translation, exactly what she was offering. I stepped forward and placed my hand against hers, and though our skin felt nothing alike, the gesture carried the same meaning it always had, on any world, among any people. Trust offered, trust accepted. What followed over the next several weeks changed the course of everything I had once believed about this world, and about my own people's place among the stars. The Queen, restored fully now, used her renewed authority to send messages outward through her own channels. Communications I later learned reached far beyond the borders of her immediate territory. She spoke of the human who had returned her daughter, of the debt she now carried, and of her intention to see that debt honored not through empty ceremony, but through an offer few among her people had ever extended to outsiders before. An alliance, not simply a truce between two wary powers, but something closer to genuine partnership, built upon the foundation of a single act neither side could have predicted. I remained on that world far longer than I ever expected, serving as something between guest and envoy, watching as tensions that had simmered along the border for longer than I had been alive slowly began to ease, replaced by cautious, careful cooperation. It was not perfect. Old fears did not vanish overnight, and there were those among both our peoples who resisted the change with every argument they could muster. But it began, undeniably, with that single moment in the great chamber, when a shattered queen looked upon her returned child and chose, against everything she had once believed, to extend her hand toward the one who had brought her daughter home. Suri and I remained close throughout all of it. She grew quickly in the months that followed, though she never once let go of the habit of seeking me out whenever something new and confusing crossed her path, treating me, I think, as something between an older sibling and a strange, permanent fixture in her life that she had simply decided to keep. One evening, months after that first desperate reunion, she found me sitting near the edge of the great chamber, watching the pulsing light move slowly through the walls the way I so often did when I needed to think. She sat beside me, and without a word, held out the crystal she had carried through our entire journey together, the one she had refused to set down even during the most dangerous moments in that forest. It was no longer broken. Somehow, in the weeks since our arrival, someone had repaired it, the two halves joined seamlessly back together, its surface catching the ambient light and scattering it in soft, shifting colors across the floor between us. She placed it gently in my hands. Through careful words we had built together over months of shared effort, she explained what it meant to her people. A token given at birth, meant to represent the unbroken bond between a child and their family. When it shattered during the chaos of her disappearance, her people had taken it as an omen of the worst kind, a sign that the bond itself might never be repaired. She wanted me to have it now, she said, because I was the one who had proven that omen wrong. I held the small, repaired crystal carefully in my hands, feeling its unexpected warmth, and thought back to that first terrified moment in the wreckage of my ship, hearing a child's cry in a language I could not understand, and choosing, without fully knowing why, not to walk away. I had not known, in that moment, that I was about to change the course of an entire world's future. I had not known that a single act of simple decency, offered without expectation of anything in return, would eventually mend a bond between two civilizations that fear and distance had kept apart for generations. I only knew that I could not leave a child crying alone in the dark. Sometimes, I have come to understand, that is all it takes. Not grand strategies, not carefully negotiated treaties born from years of careful diplomacy. Sometimes the greatest changes in the universe begin with something far simpler, a single choice, made in a single moment, by someone who refuses to look away from suffering simply because it wears an unfamiliar face. I looked out across the chamber, at the soft pulsing light that filled this living cathedral, at Suri, sitting quietly beside me, safe and whole and home, and thought of the queen, who had once been shattered, now standing tall and strong among her people once more. Whatever came next, whatever challenges still waited for both our peoples as we learned to walk this new path together, I understood, holding that small repaired crystal in my hands, that it had all begun with a single act I would make again in an instant, without hesitation, no matter the cost. I had gone looking for nothing more than a way to survive a crash on an unknown world. I had found, instead, a purpose I never could have predicted, and a bond between two very different peoples that would carry forward long after my own part in this story had faded quietly into memory. And somewhere deep within that great living chamber, as the light pulsed steadily around us like a heartbeat finally restored to its proper rhythm, I understood that some stories do not end so much as they simply continue, carried forward by everyone who chooses, in their own small way, to do what is right when it matters most.